The rain falls steadily on Tehran in late December 2025, a cold, persistent drizzle that slicks the ancient cobblestones of the Grand Bazaar and turns the air thick with the scent of wet stone, cardamom, and unsold saffron. For centuries, this labyrinth of vaulted arcades has been the pulsing heart of Iran's commerce. Merchants haggling over bolts of silk, gold, and spices under the same domed ceilings that have witnessed empires rise and fall. But in the final days of 2025, the bazaar falls silent. Shopkeepers roll down metal shutters one by one, not in coordinated fury, but in quiet, mechanical resignation. The Iranian rial has collapsed to unprecedented lows, trading at around 1.42 million to the US dollar by December 28-29, a staggering depreciation that has halved its value over the course of the year amid relentless inflation hitting 42.2% in December, with food prices surging 72% year-on-year. This is not yet the clamor of revolution. It begins as economic mechanics grinding against human endurance. Traders in the import-heavy sections, electronics, textiles, household goods, face inventories priced against an open market dollar that devours profits overnight. A single shipment of goods once affordable now costs fortunes in rials that buy less by the hour. The Grand Bazaar's closure on December 28th to 29th sends ripples outward. Merchants gather in small groups under the dripping eaves, walking over the arched bridges in silent protest, their footsteps echoing in near-empty passages. Videos capture the scene. Rows of closed stalls, a few men in wool coats standing with arms crossed, faces etched with the exhaustion of those who have watched their livelihoods evaporate. The regime watches these initial stirrings with measured calm. President Masoud Pezeshkian, who came to power in 2024, promising better governance and economic relief, issues statements acknowledging the genuine hardship. He directs investigations into incidents and announces modest adjustments to foreign exchange subsidies, aiming to redirect support toward consumers rather than intermediaries. There is no mass mobilization of Basij or Revolutionary Guards. Security presence remains light, patrols routine. Authorities frame the unrest as manageable discontent, a product of long-standing sanctions, the lingering fallout from the 2025 12-day war with Israel, renewed UN nuclear-related sanctions via the snapback mechanism, and internal mismanagement of water and energy crises. The rial's plunge is blamed on external pressures, not systemic failure. In provincial cities like Isfahan, Shiraz, and Mashhad, similar scenes unfold under the same gray skies. Shopkeepers shutter stores, small crowds form in squares, and chants begin, rhythmic, focused on relief. Demands for price controls, subsidies, an end to the currency freefall. University students in Tehran join quietly at first, their youth adding numbers but not yet fire. The air carries the metallic tang of rain on pavement, mixed with the faint smoke of small fires lit for warmth in open areas. No grand barricades, no widespread clashes, just the slow accumulation of frustration as daily survival becomes impossible. Bread, rice, medicine, essentials that once cost manageable sums now require stacks of devalued notes. By December 30 to 31st, the demonstrations gain visibility and spread. Protests appear in 17 of Iran's 31 provinces by New Year's Eve, evolving from bazaar closures to street marches. In downtown Tehran, along Sadi Street and near the Shush neighborhood, crowds swell. Some throw stones at administrative buildings in isolated incidents. In places like Fasa in the south, protesters attack a government structure. The first fatalities emerge. Several reported killed in scattered clashes, with Iranian media and rights groups noting violence as security forces respond to escalating actions. At least 7 deaths are documented by early January, including cases where live ammunition is used against demonstrators, including students and pensioners. The ironic tranquility persists in these early hours. The regime retains institutional confidence. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has not yet addressed the unrest directly. The machinery of control, selective arrests, tear gas and limited deployments, promises of dialogue, remains in reserve. President Pezeshkian speaks of unity, blaming sanctions and urging restraint from both sides. The government appoints a new central bank governor, Abdelnasser Hamati, who pledges to restore stability after the dramatic collapse. Modest financial incentives are floated to ease impoverishment. Yet the fracture lines are already visible. The rial breaks records again, dipping further as the year turns. In provincial squares, crowds clap in unison under the rain, their demands broadening subtly. The bazaar's centuries-old networks, once pillars of regime stability through economic ties and informal power, now signal vulnerability. Security patrols increase incrementally, but the streets remain contested only in pockets. Videos show marchers moving through wet avenues, faces illuminated by phone screens before signals weaken. This is the slow, inexorable turn from contained economic expression to something broader. Grievances accumulate: chronic water shortages, electricity cuts, the weight of years of isolation following regional conflicts. The regime calibrates, issues warnings, distinguishing legitimate protests from rioting. Human rights groups begin tallying early casualties, 10 to 16 deaths by the first days of January, as live fire incidents multiply. Blood mixes with rainwater in gutters during isolated confrontations, while the regime insists on control. The rain continues, washing over Tehran as the year ends, the ironic calm of initial grievances giving way to the first faint signals of doubt. The system probes its own resilience, not yet cracked, but quietly tested in the cold, persistent downpour. The streets of Tehran darken under a sudden, deliberate silence on the night of January 8, 2026. Not from the persistent winter rain, but from a nationwide internet and telecommunications blackout imposed by authorities as the protests surge into their second week. Connectivity plummets to near 1% of normal levels, plunging millions into digital isolation. Phones go dead, social media vanishes, and the flow of videos, once documenting rhythmic chants, scattered fires, and the metallic crack of live ammunition, slows to a trickle, carried only by those who still have rare access through circumvention tools or satellite links like Starlink. This is the regime's calculated pivot from selective repression to total blackout, a tactic reminiscent of the 2019 fuel protests when hundreds were killed under similar cover. Protests, which began as measured economic grievances in the Grand Bazaar on December 28, have broadened into mass demands for systemic change. Chants evolve from calls for subsidies and price relief to direct cries of "death to the dictator, death to Khamenei," and "neither Gaza nor Lebanon, my life for Iran," slogans that reject the regime's regional priorities in favor of domestic survival. University students from Amir Kabir, Sharif, and Tehran universities swell the crowds, their youth injecting urgency into the marches that now span all 31 provinces. In provincial cities like Mashhad, Kermanshah, Isfahan, and Shiraz, small groups gather in squares, clapping in unison before clashes erupt. Verified footage before the full blackout shows protesters blocking streets, setting fires to government buildings and symbols, and confronting security forces with stones against tear gas and live rounds. The crackdown intensifies in lockstep. Security forces deploy heavily, using unlawful force including firearms, as documented by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. Between December 31, 2025 and January 3, 2026, at least 28 protesters and bystanders, including children, are killed across 13 cities in 8 provinces, with the deadliest repression in Kurdish and Luri regions like Loristan, at least 8 killed, and Elam 5. By January 9th, Norway-based Iran Human Rights reports at least 51 deaths, including 9 children under 18, and hundreds injured in the first 13 days. Reports from hospitals in Tehran and Rasht indicate dozens more bodies arriving after January 8th clashes. The regime distinguishes sharply. President Masoud Pezeshkian acknowledges genuine economic grievances, directing investigations and promising relief through new subsidies and wage adjustments, while warning against rioters who destabilize the country. He urges unity against external pressures like sanctions and blames the economic freefall on lingering effects of the 2025 12-day war. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, speaking on January 3rd and escalating on January 9th, vows no backdown. "We talk to the protesters, but the rioters must be put in their place," he states, framing the unrest as foreign orchestrated sabotage, a bunch of vandals acting to please the U.S. president. The IRGC Provincial Corps in Loristan declares the period of tolerance over, pledging to target organizers. The Supreme National Security Council echoes this, accusing saboteurs of foreign backing. Arrests climb into the hundreds, then thousands, with over 2,300 detained by mid-January, according to activist networks. Initial U.S. signals emerge amid the rising violence. President Donald Trump, in early January statements, warns that the U.S. is locked and loaded to intervene if Iran kills more protesters, escalating to threats of hitting them very, very hard where it hurts. without boots on the ground. He posts support. Iran is looking at freedom. USA stands ready to help. Allies like Senator Lindsey Graham warn the Ayatollahs that continued killings will draw lethal response. Secretary of State Marco Rubio signals U.S. backing for the brave people of Iran. These public postures add external pressure to the internal fracture, testing the regime's narrative of control, while the blackout obscures the scale of the response. The streets, now contested under shrouded skies and severed communications, reveal the cold mechanics at work. A regime deploying isolation and lethal force to contain what began as economic pain, while protesters push forward in growing numbers. Doubt deepens in the quiet gaps between gunfire. Not yet a collapse, but a system visibly straining against domestic momentum and foreign signaling. The third night of unrelenting unrest descends on Iran on January 10, 2026. The blackout still absolute, severing the country from the world as connectivity hovers near 1% of normal, with only sporadic leaks via satellite links or smuggled footage piercing the digital veil. Under darkened skies in Tehran, Mashhad, Kermanshah, and beyond, the streets become arenas of raw confrontation. Rhythmic clapping echoes through wet avenues, fires erupt from barricades and regime symbols, and the sharp reports of live fire cut through the night. Verified videos, delayed, grainy, often captured on hidden devices, show crowds in Haravi Square marching in thousands, chanting, "Death to the dictator, death to Khamenei." Faces illuminated by phone flashlights turn defiance against the regime's deliberate dimming of streetlights. In Sadadabad, West Tehran, protesters surge forward as security agents reportedly flee, the crowd swelling with cries of "Death to Khamenei" while bonfires roar. Violence escalates dramatically across cities. Clashes rage in provincial strongholds. In western Iran, IRGC forces deploy heavily, opening fire on demonstrators. In Kermanshah, reports emerge of at least 10 IRGC ground forces, Nabi Akram unit members killed in confrontations. A mosque is set ablaze in Tehran, flames licking the night as crowds dance around bonfires in other districts. Eyewitness accounts describe bodies piling up in hospitals, chaotic scenes where patients fear identification, doctors overwhelmed, and security forces entering wards to arrest the wounded. Blood shortages grip facilities in Tehran and Rasht, with gunshot wounds dominating admissions. Hospitals in Shiraz and Tehran overflow with injured, many minors among them. The death toll rises sharply amid the isolation. Norway-based Iran Human Rights reports at least 51 killed, including 9 children under 18 in the first 13 days through January 9th, with hundreds injured. Other groups like HRANA and Washington-based networks cite figures approaching 70 by January 10th, including protesters, bystanders, and some security personnel. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch last updated around January 8 to 9th, with at least 28 confirmed deaths, including children, across multiple provinces, warn of further bloodshed under blackout cover, evoking the 2019 mass killings. Credible but unverified reports trickle in of dozens more fatalities in the nights of January 9 to 10th, with activists fearing mass killings obscured by the shutdown. Arrests surge into the thousands, with hospitals and streets becoming sites of detention. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in televised addresses on January 9th and escalating threats, condemns protesters as vandals, saboteurs, and rioters bent on destruction to please foreign powers, particularly the U.S. president. He vows to put rioters in their place, framing the unrest as foreign orchestrated while reaffirming no concession. President Masoud Pezeshkian balances measured sympathy for economic grievances with stern warnings against destabilizing rioters, urging restraint and unity against external pressures like sanctions and the 2025 war fallout. The IRGC declares security a red line, with provincial commanders signaling the end of tolerance and judiciary officials warning of maximum punishment, including death penalty charges for participation. Amid this domestic fracture, U.S. signaling intensifies. President Donald Trump, in statements and posts around January 9 to 10th, threatens lethal force if killings continue, reiterating the U.S. is locked and loaded and ready to help the brave people of Iran. He warns of hitting the regime very, very hard without boots on the ground, praising protesters' pursuit of freedom. Secretary of State Marco Rubio declares U.S. support for the Iranian people. These public postures, coupled with reports of Trump being briefed on military strike options, inject external dread into the regime's calculus, testing assumptions of internal resilience against the risk that repression could invite unilateral intervention. The streets, shrouded in blackout shadows and punctuated by gunfire and rhythmic chants, expose the merciless mechanics. A regime wielding lethal force and isolation to stem momentum that began in economic pain but now demands regime change. The balance teeters, control not yet shattered but deeply contested in real time, with every delayed video and rising casualty count probing the system's breaking point. The blackout enters its fourth day on January 11, 2026, a deliberate veil of darkness that has severed Iran from the outside world for over 60 hours, with connectivity still hovering near 1% of normal levels. Sporadic signals leak through via Starlink terminals jammed by regime efforts, or smuggled footage showing crowds in Tehran, Mashhad, Isfahan, and Shiraz defying the silence. In Hiravi Square, thousands march under dimmed streetlights, clapping rhythmically, chanting death to the dictator and death to Khamenei, their voices amplified by the absence of digital noise. Bonfires illuminate faces, etched with exhaustion and resolve, while in Saadatabad and other districts, protesters surge forward as security forces reportedly retreat in pockets, the air thick with smoke from burning regime symbols and the metallic tang of blood on wet pavement. Violence continues unabated amid the isolation. Clashes rage in multiple provinces, with verified accounts of live fire, barricades ablaze, and bodies piling in hospitals overwhelmed by gunshot wounds and blood shortages. The regime reports dozens of security personnel killed, state media citing 30 in Isfahan and 6 in Kermanshah, with totals exceeding 100 across the country, framing them as victims of saboteurs and rioters. Opposition groups like HRANA document at least 490 protesters killed, alongside 48 security forces, with over 10,600 arrests, including hundreds of children. Other estimates from Iran human rights and activists push the toll higher, into the hundreds or even thousands in unverified reports, as the blackout obscures mass casualties feared under cover of darkness. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, speaking in recent addresses, condemns protesters as vandals, saboteurs, and a bunch of people bent on destruction, accusing them of acting to please foreign powers, particularly the U.S. president. He vows to put rioters in their place, framing the unrest as orchestrated chaos while reaffirming no concessions. President Masoud Pezeshkian balances acknowledgement of genuine economic grievances with warnings against rioters destabilizing the country, urging unity and restraint while blaming external pressures like sanctions and the 2025 war fallout. The IRGC declares security a red line, with Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf warning that U.S. military bases and Israel would be legitimate targets if attacked. In Washington, President Donald Trump has been briefed in recent days on military strike options against Iran, including potential actions targeting security services or non-military sites in Tehran, as he weighs responding to the crackdown. Officials emphasize no final decision has been made, with risks of backlash, retaliation against U.S. assets, or rallying Iranian support for the regime looming large. Trump reiterates public threats. Iran is looking at freedom, perhaps like never before, and that the U.S. stands ready to help, while warning of hitting the regime very, very hard if killings continue. Secretary of State Marco Rubio signals U.S. backing for the brave people of Iran, and allies like Senator Lindsey Graham echo lethal resolve. The balance hangs in precarious tension. Protests and crackdowns ongoing across all 31 provinces, death tolls rising amid isolation, external signaling amplifying internal dread. In multipolarity, internal resilience is being contested, not yet defeated. Follow for updates as this real-time event unfolds.